Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Ina. I have recently joined this work group working with Don on network pharmacology and uncovering ontologies and pathways using Neo4j and, well, various tools. By day, I'm a software developer, and by Sundays, I'm part of this working group. And today I'm going to talk about the clustering in general, more of the how rather than why. And we will also look at the K-means algorithm as a deep dive. So clustering, the general purpose of it is, of course, to group the data into clusters, as the name suggests, and it's critical for analyzing large data sets. It can help uncover uh, various patterns and relationships. It can also simplify data for analysis and visualization. And of course, it can help with predictions and facilitate decision making. And there are there are numerous algorithms that could be used. I guess K-means is one of the most widespread. It's a centroid-based algorithm that minimizes the distance between the data points and the center of their assigned cluster. And there is also an MCL algorithm that a StreamDB suggests, for example. It's a graph-based clustering algorithm that is specifically designed for network data, and it operates by simulating random walks within a network. For in our case, it could be used for, say, protein-protein interaction networks, and it reinforces the denser regions, and this leads to identifying of the clusters. So we're going to talk about the clustering in general. This is like a short agenda, and then we'll look at the K-means algorithm. We'll talk about how we initialize the centroids and how we will talk about the cost function. And the most importantly is probably choosing the right number of clusters, because K-means is the algorithm that uses predefined number of clusters. We cannot just randomly select one. And then as a summary, we will talk about when to use it and when not to use it. So clustering is a technique, unsupervised machine learning technique that that groups related or similar objects into clusters, and it doesn't require data labeling. So, for example, if we have a supervised machine learning technique that has examples labeled, this kind of grouping would be called classification. And the standard process of clustering includes, we can say that it includes 4 steps. So the first one would be to extract and select the most representative features from the original data set. Then we would proceed by designing the clustering algorithm, or, well, selecting the most appropriate one according to the characteristics of the problem. We would evaluate the result as our third step, and we will judge the validity of algorithm. And finally, we would do result explanation, meaning that we would give a practical explanation for the clustering results that we receive. We can try to cluster numerical data or categorical data. So for numerical quantitative data, we use distance to measure. We use distance as a measurement. We can use various types of distance, Euclidean, Manhattan. I will not go into detail on those. And then for qualitative data, we use similarity as the measurement. We can divide various clustering algorithms by dimensions. So this is like a little tree showing what those dimensions can be. And talking about the k-means algorithm, so if we look at the partition underlying principles and characteristics of it, it's a partition based. So it separates data points that we have into various parts. By the membership type, it's an exclusive cluster membership algorithm, because each data point can have only one, can be assigned only to one cluster, or cluster to each data point, right? So we cannot have two clusters assigned to the same data point. It uses hard clustering, and it needs we need to specify the number of clusters beforehand, so we need to know that. And it works in various areas, and it also works with different types of data sets. So we don't really care about the size, and there are several modifications to k-means algorithm that were designed over like years from 1960 that can help us work with all the sizes of the data sets that we have. And I included this table just for reference. Will not, it's very hand wavy, but just talking about the partition-based algorithms in general and k-means in particular, there are several benefits and limitations that we need to know before we select it. So the benefits would be the cost efficiency. It really uses it has low time complexity and computation complexity. So it's pretty good if you have a large data set, basically. And it's relatively simple to implement. You will see that it only has 3 steps. But of course, it has the limitations that can be overcome. But the algorithm by itself is pretty sensitive to outliers. It can also be drawn to local optima. We'll see how we can address that. And then it requires the predefined number of clusters, which we've already mentioned, hence the K in the k-means. So yeah, the algorithm itself, as I said, it only has 3 steps. So given a set of data points, we start by initializing the centroids. So when we do that, we randomly select k centroids from the data points, and then we assign data points to the nearest centroid. So in this step of k-means, the algorithm assigns each training example to the nearest centroid based on the current centroid position. And it then pretty much returns, it calculates the distance from the data points to each centroid and selects the centroid with the smallest distance. We then go on and update centroids. So in this phase, centroids are updated by recomputing the means of the points assigned to each centroid. And you can see that at the graph. So my, dotted lines, red ones that I drew there, this would be the updated centroid after we assigned our data points to the initial set of centroids, those little red crosses you see, right? So after recomputing the distance, our new centroid, our new point of mean would be here, where this red cross is. And after that, we just go on and repeat the assignment and updating steps, so steps 2 and 3, until the centroids no longer move. So when our centroid locations don't change, we just stop there. So that's it, right? So we should mention as well that the k-means algorithm, it always converges. So it will always have a final set of centroids, but the results of how well it's been done can depend on the initial centroid positions, hence drawing to the local minima. Okay, so we start by initializing centroids randomly. How do we do that? Well, one way is just to select some points any points, which is pretty bad idea. Well, not bad, but like the more efficient way of doing that is just picking randomly k training examples from our existing data set. And we do that by just shuffling the initial data points and selecting the first k examples. I should say that there is a constraint that the number of clusters has to be lower than the number of examples. So we need to know that. And we also need to know that there is a chance that the algorithm may get stuck in local minimum. It depends on, well, the initial points of the centroids, and it can result in suboptimal clustering. But there is a way to minimize this effect, and it can be minimized by running k-means algorithm multiple times. And we use different random initializations of the points. So we can do that, well, depending on how much precision we want, we can do that from 50 to 1,000 times. And then we choose the best local optimum by computing the cost function. So it's also called distortion for each solution, and we select the lowest distortion. Right. This is the cost function that we use to evaluate the best solution, and we sum all the square distances between the points, and then they're assigned centroids. So we just deduct x from x. We deduct m, which is a squared Euclidean distance between the point and its centroid. And then we sum that, and the solution with the lowest cost wins. All right, but we said that we need to know the number of clusters in advance, but how do we do that? So selecting the right value can be ambiguous, and well, just by looking at the data, we may see a different number of clusters depending on the data set, and you see at the graph that, well, how many clusters do we have there? It can be 4, it can be 3. It depends on the way you look at it, right? There are several methods we could use, and I will talk about the elbow method in a second. But we should also know that, well, choosing the right number of clusters really depends on what makes sense for our specific problem at hand. So if we know how many we have, just based on the problem we are trying to solve, we should go on and do just that. But if we need some method to choose or to start with, say, there is an elbow method. It's called elbow because on the graph we're looking for this elbow point where the data stops changing rapidly. And this method helps determine the optimal number of clusters by assessing how well the cluster fit the data. It plots the number of square distances. It's also called inertia, which measures how far data points are from the centroid of their assigned cluster. And the lower inertia means that better better clustering, as points are closer to their cluster center. The goal, as I mentioned, is to find this elbow point where the curve bends, and this would indicate that like the number of clusters. And in this case, beyond this point, adding more clusters doesn't significantly reduce the inertia, so we wouldn't have much improvement by just increasing the number of clusters. This prevents overfitting and overclustering because, well, we of course, the more clusters we select, the less like the better cost value we would receive. But we really don't want to do that, right? We do not want to assign each data point to one I mean, we don't want each cluster to have one single data point assigned to it. So yeah, it's a visual way to balance fit and simplicity. And well, in our example, 3 would be the optimal number of clusters we would want to use. Okay, and I guess finally we can like summarize well the usage of k-means algorithm, and we can say that the best way to use this algorithm would be when we have large data sets, because we mentioned the efficiency and how it can compute the groups in a relatively low time, and well, it does it efficiently. It also can be used with the numeric data, less so with the categorical data. But again, there are ways to adapt k-means algorithm to usage with categorical data. We can use that, of course, if we have the clear clusters. So when the data naturally forms distinct, non-overlapping clusters, or when we know the cluster number in advance, or if we used the method to identify the cluster number. When not to use it. So if we cannot know the exact number of clusters in advance, we have no way of estimating that. We talked how it's kind of sensitive to outliers, so there are algorithms that better deal with outliers. For example, like dbScan, the one that is also present in string. And yeah, k-means is designed to work with numerical data primarily. So when we have categorical data, it may not be optimal, but there are also several ways of how we can adapt k-means to working with categorical data. So for example, if we have some categories, I don't know, red, blue, and green, we can assign them, assign them to numerical values. And yeah, you use that basically to adapt. Right? So this is the short overview of the k-means algorithm. And I guess that's it on my side. All right, hopefully you can see the k-means clustering Google Colab. Well, we talked about the algorithm in general, and it summarizes some, the 3 main steps of initializing centroids, assigning the data points to the nearest centroids, and updating the centroids based on that. And that's how the algorithm itself looks like. So we start by providing the initial centroid data points and figuring out the k, like the number of clusters based on that. Then iteratively, we are going to find the closest centroids, and we can provide the number of iterations as well. This is just to visually represent it. And then we recompute the centroids. So when we do find the first closest centroid, we get the k from the input values. We calculate the distance. as a norm the distance from the data point to its assigned centroid. We then take the minimum distance, and the centroid with the minimum distance would be the one assigned to our data point. After doing that, the next step is computing centroids. So for that, we're going and for each centroid and data point, we calculate the mean. And we return updated centroids assigned to each data point, or vice versa, data points to centroid. And this is the example of using that. So we're initializing the data set with three. This is just a sample data set with 3 clusters. Yeah, that's how it's gonna look. First, I'm given the just any points, not randomly selecting them from the data set, but just any points there. And I wanted to show how that local minima that drawn into the local minimum that we were talking about, right? So this algorithm really is dependent on how close the initial points are, and it will always converge, as I said, but it doesn't guarantee you that it will always converge correctly unless you run it multiple times, assessing the cost, right? So running several iterations, it finally converges, and you can see how it moves from the initialized centroid points to the correct clusters. So on each step, it gets updated, and finally, when there are no more changes, it means that our clustering happened. So it converged. And that's how we would initialize our starting centroid points. Knowing their number, we would shuffle our data points using NumPy's random permutation, and then select the first n examples. And using that, we would avoid duplications as well. So it guarantees that our centroids are like 3 separate points there. And yeah, as we return centroids as a NumPy array. And yeah, that's how it looks like. This example goes with the random init, and every time we run it, we will see different initial centroids there, but they still converge and sort of form our clusters. But the algorithm is not very difficult, right? But the good thing is that we don't need to implement it ourselves. Luckily, libraries such as sklearn have already did that for us. So we can just utilize that and also get all the information we're interested in, like cluster centers, k-mean labels, and all that. So these are the results of the k-mean using sklearn, which are just as good as our algorithm that we implemented there. And we'll proceed.
I'm having a good laugh at real life there, Ina. I mean, just in terms of an appreciation of what you put into this week, you moved from the U.S. to, the other side of,
Yeah.
North America. You moved to Vancouver. And, so obviously you're still in the process of moving, but, what you put together is just really amazing.
Yes, thank you, Don. Thank you. Yes, Michael, of course. We'll share it on Slack. And yeah, well, a few final points. So we talked about the elbow method as the way of selecting uh, the the right number of clusters and computing the inertia. So this would be an example of how we could do that. So we calculate k-means for the number of clusters we're interested in, and in our case that would be 9, right? And just fit in the data and visually representing it, we then can see the right elbow and the right point, showing the number of clusters we need to select. And finally, well, this is kind of a stretch, and Don, you maybe can help me as well with just getting the why and how useful that is. But here I tried to use Don's wonderful data set on the secondary screen dose response parameters, and selecting specifics, specifically lung cancer, to minimize, to downsize the number of points. And then go on and plot the data. So yeah, that's how it looks like. That's the data that we selected from our data set, and we selected 2 features, EC50 and AUC. It doesn't, in my example, it doesn't really represent anything in particular. I just wanted to show that we can select any numerical data features basically, and plot them and cluster them based on that. Then we can go on and run the elbow method for our data set. And I would say that in this case, again, like 3 would be the optimal number of clusters, because then adding more clusters doesn't really significantly improve the results. So selecting 3 clusters, we can go on and use our algorithm to group them. And here's what we have: final input. The green cluster is way bigger probably than all the outliers. And as I mentioned, this algorithm is sensitive to outliers. So by cleaning the data set, or selecting selecting the features we're more interested in, we can minimize this outliers variance. And we can, if outliers are inevitable, we can try and look at other clustering algorithms that can help us with that. And yeah, I think that would be it.